You're listening to There Ought to Be a Law, the Center for Auto Safety podcast with Executive Director Michael Brooks, Chief Engineer Fred Perkins, and hosted by me, Anthony Cimino. For over 50 years, the Center for Auto Safety has worked to make cars safer. Hey listeners, today is Wednesday, January 14th for us. What day is it for you? Anyway.
Hopefully Thursday, January 15th.
Hopefully Thursday, January 15th. Yeah, maybe. It could be, we haven't specified the year,
It could be 3028.
There could be a couple on a road trip right now and be like, well, let's listen to something else. And they accidentally click on this in their self-driving flying car.
Yeah. You guys have to learn to behave. This is a respectful audience.
Oh, yeah. I'm not disrespecting the audience. Well, maybe. Anyway, I want to start off the show by saying I this is my opinion. I do not know if this is the opinion of the Center for Auto Safety, but absolutely positively do not get into a Tesla. And my reasoning for this is I had to look into the Tesla manuals for how to do the manual door release, because we've talked about this a bunch about get into a crash, the 12-volt system dies, and now the electric doors won't open. Well, I found in the Tesla Model 3 that not only do you have to know where these hidden cables are, but you have to know where and when your car was manufactured, because it's different depending on when and where your car was manufactured.
What a nightmare.
Yeah, and complicating that, it's probably, I think at some point, Tesla switched from tempered side glass to laminated. So you've got to beware of that if your door doesn't open, how you're going to get out through laminated glass, which most of us don't carry power tools around with us.
Right. And I couldn't find, I believe it was the Model Y, I couldn't find how to escape from their back seats.
There is one Tesla, I don't know if it's the Y or the S, that does not have a rear seat manual release.
Yeah, either way, it's frightening. So I can say that I recommend not getting into a Tesla. Would anyone else like to agree with me?
The good news is that there was legislation released just last week that, we talked about at the legislative hearing yesterday that would address the internal and the external issues with getting into vehicles with electric door latches. And tell NHTSA they need to make a rule about it and standardize those locations and make it easier on all of us humans out there.
So, Michael, tell us about this testimony, because you went up on Capitol Hill and you said, I testify. And he sang from the Rage Against the Machine catalog.
We were invited, and I'd like to thank the Energy and Commerce Committee for inviting me to testify on a lot of auto safety legislation that was released, some in the previous year, some just last week, including a new autonomous driving bill and a NHTSA Modernization Act. And I don't think it comes to any surprise that we're opposing the autonomous driving bill. It's kind of a new way of going about an old tack for the auto industry, which is they're trying to preempt states from getting in their way. And the language is so sloppy that I think it preempts virtually anything that states would do that could impact electric cars. The industry is denying this. Every consumer group and attorney that I've spoken to is of the same reading as we are. So there's some things that are going to have to be worked out in that language as it moves forward. There were a lot of good bills that we reviewed in the hearing. There's some really good bills on data. There's some good bills on touch screens and the safety impacts they could be having. A lot of great stuff, but it was, good to be able to have a dialogue on it in public with the industry and with our representatives.
So what happened? They said, we're going to hold a hearing on, and we're going to cram everything auto safety related into this afternoon.
Yeah, basically all the legislation. And what ends up happening is, there's majority witnesses. There were 3 witnesses from the majority. I was the minority witness. And so, you end up answering a lot of questions about the bills that were proposed by the representatives, whether they're in the majority witnesses typically are asked the question, minority witnesses are asked. So it was a good opportunity to be able to speak on a lot of things like better automatic emergency braking and some of the other things I just talked about.
So I'll take the example of automatic emergency braking because I want to get into the weeds on this because that's one we've talked about a lot on this show. So what representatives from like Ford or automakers were there? Or was this all on the minority side, I imagine consumer advocacy groups, and on the majority side, it was Brent Boswell.
You know, the majority side had the Alliance for Automotive Innovation there. And they had a member from the Auto Care Association who supports right to repair, which is something, you know, we're all behind. So it was good to see him there. And they as well had a kind of an independent consultant that's also, I believe, a member of the PAVE Coalition's board, which is, you know, an autonomous vehicle industry group. That, you know, not, I don't know how to describe them. They're a little different than the AVIA, but ultimately I think they have the same goal of pushing autonomy and autonomous cars across our roads and streets as fast as possible so that the investors in the industry see a return and the companies make a lot of money, but they are, you know, in pretty significant disagreement, I believe, with a lot of the principles that Fred has proposed on this show in the past.
So did anyone give a good reason why they were against automatic emergency braking? Because these are not the auto manufacturers.
Well, you know, the automatic emergency braking legislation that's proposed is going to expand on what NHTSA released a couple of years back, something that the auto industry is still, their court case has been put on hold for now while NHTSA takes another look at the rule. So we're still waiting to see what happens there. And if they modify the rule in a way that's negative, that reduces its protections. But the bill that's on tap would expand AEB to some really important groups that were left out of the first round, which would be, bicyclists, motorcyclists, people in electric wheelchairs, virtually any type of conveyance that's allowed on the road. Also, it would expand. It would make the speeds at which pedestrian detection happens at a greater rate, and has some language about algorithmic bias. The great majority of pedestrians that are killed and injured every year are Black and Latino folks, and there's a push to get into the law protections that ensure that the sensors in these vehicles are going to see everyone, regardless of what their race is, which we like. And, which I like to talk about, infrared cameras in that regard, because they don't see color. They detect the warmth that we all have within us. So they're a great idea that I don't see enough of in cars. And they can also prevent things like animal strikes. And, if you can see other humans riding in a car ahead of you, I think, which could also assist with automatic emergency braking vehicle to vehicle. So we will see how that turns out, since the new automatic emergency braking rules don't kick in until 2028, 2029, depending on what happens with NHTSA's review and the court. It may be difficult to get another automatic emergency braking bill through this particular Congress. But that's the next stage for automatic emergency braking: higher speeds, better pedestrian detection, better detection of road users. And it's something that I think the industry can and should get done fast, because after all, they're promising us all these autonomous vehicles that need to be detecting all those things as well if they're going to drive safely. So the technology, I think, at this point is relatively mature in that area, particularly if you consider all the bluster about cars that drive themselves.
So your overall feeling walking away from this is you sound relatively positive.
Well, it's good to see good legislation being proposed. I mean, one of the biggest problems that, we and the safety world has faced for years with Congress is that there are very few bills that are passed on their own to address safety. Typically, and even earlier in my career, 20 years ago, it was somewhat rare. I mean, it would require something like the Ford Firestone tire problem to really get Congress behind enacting some reforms that would kind of clamp down and make sure that manufacturers were continuing to operate with safety as their number one concern. Now, every 4 years there's a reauthorization act, that the surface transportation reauthorization, and a lot of the safety legislation that's been produced in the preceding 4 years or so gets put into that. And it can be a very partisan and difficult process to get certain safety legislation in there, but there's some good bills that are proposed that I think address some things that, some research. I really think we need to do research on, touchscreens and phones, more research on the distraction that can be caused there, mainly because, there's a massive pedestrian problem going on right now, with pedestrian fatalities and injuries, and no one can really point to a reason why. And yet, if you look at the numbers, they started rising around the time when smartphones became commonplace, and they haven't really gone down as touchscreens have migrated into cars in the last few years. I also heard that touchscreens are in like 97% of new vehicles now. That's crazy to me. That's such a fast change from dashboard and the old style cars to touchscreens. It's incredible that it's happened that quick.
Well, listeners, if you've enjoyed hearing Michael and his legislation testimony and you want to help support it, go to autosafety.org and click on donate, and you can help pay his bus fare to Washington, D.C. every time he goes up on the Hill. Autosafety.org, donate. And we have a link to an article in the Austin American Statesman where Michael Brooks is like the main source for it. He's got some great juicy quotes in there. It's really fun little read. And now let's move on to every other story this week, which is, as far as I can tell, a gaslight. It's a nonstop gaslight. Gaslight, gaslight, gaslight. Starting with a little German company called Mercedes. We've all heard of Mercedes. Now, 2 years ago, Mercedes released their Level 3 car. This is take your hands off, your eyes off, your brain off. If you're in the state of Nevada on certain roads going below 35 miles per hour, then they eventually increased it to if you're going below 40 miles per hour, and if you're in sections of California. And now they came out and said, nah, let's not do that. Let's call it Level 2 plus plus plus. It's the exact same thing, but we've removed the speed requirements. We removed the operating design domain, so you can use it everywhere. Just don't call it Tesla. It's fascinating.
One of the major changes they've made is that they've decided Tesla has the right idea. And one of the requirements for Level 3 is that it would only operate if there was another vehicle ahead of it on the road. And so if you had the open road, your Level 3 turns off, and inconveniently enough, the human being has to drive the car again. So this is a step back in terms of safety, a step forward in terms of marketing. Go ahead.
And here's the thing. I mean, why would Mercedes go through the hoops to establish a Level 3 vehicle, on a few interstates in Nevada and a few in California, when Tesla is out there? I got a call from one of our former guests a couple of days back who said, he was driving a Tesla the other day. He went 100 miles without touching, anything in the vehicle. It controlled itself. So why would Mercedes go through all of that to be able to allow people to take their attention away from the road, but at lower speeds and traffic jams in very specific circumstances, when they can do what Tesla's doing and just let the car drive itself? And, when it fails, like we expect, they're going to be trying to blame the humans for not adequately monitoring the vehicle. And they're going to try, just like Tesla has done, to not take any blame for the contribution of the automated system to those crashes.
All right. They designed the car to European standards. European standards are much more conservative than American standards with respect to safety. So I think that's where they got themselves wrapped around the axle. They thought that what's good for Europeans is good for Americans too. They underestimated the yippee-ki-yay factor in American car design.
Yeah, it's amazing. So the Mercedes and the CEO of NVIDIA, the CEO of NVIDIA said, hey, I want to join this automotive gaslighting thing too, saying we have this whole new AI system, and we're running 2 AI systems at once. One of them is the predictive model fancy, and the other one's the old school rules based one. So if one fails, it'll go back to the other one. We have no idea how any of this works, but here I am on stage at CES, and I run the world's most valuable company forever. Look at me. I'm a cool guy wearing a leather jacket. So I'm going to quote from, again, I apologize for getting this name wrong. And you'll guess, maybe will correct me. Junko, her Substack. And
Junko Yoshida.
Junko Yoshida from her Substack, I'm going to quote, says, nonetheless, NVIDIA CEO stated his preference was that we start with level 2++, because you add more pluses and it means something, and put it in the hands of customers and give them plenty of chances to push the limits. By that means, someone's going to die. I don't care. Look at my stock price. If this is not strategy straight out of Tesla's playbook, what is? This is exactly Tesla. Further down, why does this matter? Years of human factor studies have shown that human drivers, when operating in autonomous mode, assume that the vehicle is fully self-sufficient, lending to a false sense of security. I also like to call that the Phil Kopman rule, because he tells us that every time he's on the show. And that's the thing, is you think, hey, man, the car's driving itself. We're all good. I'm going to go sit in the back seat.
I mean, it's literally a trap, right? That's being set. And I know there are people who think they can drive or let these things operate and drive around, and that they're monitoring the whole time. And I question that. I feel like everyone is imperfect at some times in some ways, and some people are probably arguably more imperfect a lot more of the time than others, and are going to be subject to not monitoring the vehicle's operation because they've driven in this mode so much and trust it. And I think it's like a trust trap, just waiting to happen. As soon as it fails and you're not ready to take over, bad things can happen.
So this is going to get to my specific gaslight now. Continuing in Junko Yoshida's Substack, quoting, I asked Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, I can't get anybody's name correct today, how do you plan to deal with the well-known problem of machine-to-human handover? He dodged the question, saying, you just answered your own question. The answer is, don't ever have a handover. What? Like that? Huh? Yeah, so man, so the plus means, my lawyers told me to put an extra plus in there. That's what that is.
I don't understand that. How do you not have a handover unless you're a level 4?
No, because it's level 2++, so you always have to be.
The pluses don't equal no handover.
No, man,
right?
I mean, you never let go, so you didn't get it out of your hands. It's driving itself. Have you seen my leather jacket? Okay.
I mean, level 2++ is quickly, it already has been a nonsense zone, but it's quickly becoming a massive nonsense zone where manufacturers are going to basically be able to deploy almost anything they like and continue blaming the human when things go wrong with the automated systems.
So anyway, that's my gaslight of this week. I could have really chosen anything, tell you the truth. Because virtually every other story we have is it's rude. I think it's a CES hangover. It's how 2026 starts. I don't know.
I think it's kind of with all this hype around AI and all the hype we've talked about the last few years. This is just the next level of it.
Well, Fred, are you ready for your gaslight? And can it beat the quote, have you seen my leather jacket?
I got a different one.
Okay.
It's Jeff Thara. Let me go ahead and talk about his testimony. In a previous incarnation, I guess. So what he said then is that his members, the AVIA members, have driven more than 145 million autonomous miles. But my comment is not really, because every AV has got a human supervisor, either in place or remote. Yeah. And so none of the miles have actually been fully autonomous.
And you're talking about multiple manufacturers there where they're just adding it up too. And you certainly can't make a safety you can't make a safety argument based on 20 different AV manufacturers' data.
Well, that's right. But in fact, most autonomous miles have been driven in vehicles built by companies that are not AVIA members, particularly Tesla and the Chinese companies. So Tesla has far more miles, autonomous miles driven, and sadly enough, many more accidents and fatalities associated with the autonomous driving than any other company.
Wait, does Tesla actually have any autonomous? Miss Miles?
No,
they do it all. Well, they do it all the time.
There's a lot of ways you can talk about this, but it's technically at level 4. The miles that AVIA is talking about would be level 4 plus or 4 or 5. The miles that Tesla talks about, first of all, there's no way to verify that it's even happened. And some of them are in autopilot in some modes, some of them are in full self. It's just such a mix, and there's so little insight as to the data they're using there that it's hard to talk about.
What that really points out is the shortcomings in the definitions of the SAE levels of automation, because in fact, those are all computer-driven vehicle miles. However you want to slice and dice that.
Yep.
So maybe that's something else that should be addressed at some point. But in any case, ignoring Tesla's safety record does not enhance AVIA's credibility in any way. He also said the miles have doubled in the last year. This happened in the absence of a federal policy framework, leaving U.S. companies at a competitive disadvantage to China and other countries. That was a quote, by the way. And to me, it doesn't really sound like they're suffering much of a disadvantage if they're piling up miles at 22 million for some odd miles per year, or 70 million miles per year, right? So why is it that he believes that the industry is somehow inhibited in their development by the Chinese? Oh God, help us from the Chinese. He said earlier this year, another quote, AVIA released detailed policy recommendations called Securing America's Leadership in Autonomous Vehicles. Basically, the heart of that is that NHTSA should initiate a rulemaking for federal motor vehicle safety standards informed by industry and the work of existing standard setting bodies. That's okay, but it excludes organizations like ours who are public advocates who are trying to get safety built into these standards. And he also wants companies to self-certify their ADS to demonstrate a basic level of ADS driving proficiency. So the companies want Congress to set standards that they've written that exclude public input on what safety means, and then have the automotive companies who've written these standards self-certify that they're complying with the standards. Sounds a little tautological to me.
Sounds like a closed loop.
Yeah. Then he goes on to say federal regulation puts states in the forefront of policymaking that is desperately needed in need of federal direction. But he's already advocated for federal preemption of state regulation, so it's hard to see how his trying to empower the states doesn't conflict with his stance for federal preemption of the states. So it's a little confusing. And then he says, an American public that's increasingly riding in autonomous vehicles and loving the experience. But from what I've seen, people are setting them on fire. They're putting cones on top of the vehicles to keep them from operating. They're not enthusiastic about bicyclists being run over or domestic animals being run over. I don't see that this groundswell of public opinion, but maybe I'm missing something.
Yeah, you're focused on the wrong people. You got to keep in mind the audience for robo-taxis and who it's made for and who's building it are a bunch of socially awkward tech bros who can't hold eye contact. That's who's building this. That's the problem it's solving. It's Barry who, didn't go to prom. I mean, I didn't go to prom, but and he can't hold a conversation with a stranger in a back of a taxi for 20 minutes or ignore them politely.
Well, you're getting kind of close to home with that character.
That's a really tough definition. I think
you're getting pretty close to home with that definition.
Yeah. Don't upset Fred.
Come on, Fred. I'm fully confident that Fred could sit in the back seat of a taxi for up to 28 minutes and be fine.
Then he goes on. Thank you, Anthony. Then he goes on to conclude that AVs will be game changers for the elderly and people with disabilities. I am a member of that cohort, and I really don't understand how removing a driver who might help me with groceries or luggage or getting in and out of the vehicle somehow enhances my experience with taxi transportation or transportation for hire.
Well, that's interesting you say that because I just watched a piece where the CEO of Lyft said, hey, in the future, it's going to be like you're either going to choose a fully autonomous vehicle, there won't be, but maybe if like you're older and you need help with groceries, you'll choose one with a person inside of it and they'll help you out. And hey, isn't this great? Should I wear a leather jacket when I do PR pieces?
Yeah, I've had taxi drivers actually do that, and it costs me an extra $1 from time to time. But
Ooh, Mr. Big Bucks.
that's, the other thing to consider about that is that the AVs are only going to be operating in high density areas. So anybody living on the boonies, like again me and Michael, he raised his hand, are just going to be SOL with that.
Yeah.
And finally, he says the time is short, and it is now. Well, time is always now, unless it's then. So I'm not sure what the hell he meant by that. But
Now.
Well,
anyway, there we go. So anyway, I'll give it to Jeff Farrar, even though it wasn't as timely as I had hoped it would be.
Hey, it's okay. I once called out a gaslight for an event that we already covered that happened a year earlier. So
yeah, it could be.
It happens.
Well, I mean, I'll take a gaslight from yesterday's hearing, not targeting really anyone in specific, but the entire automaker and AV industry, because we think they're trying to pull the wool over the eyes of the American public and some member of Congress by saying that the bill they released last week, they're claiming it is a bipartisan bill, but it's produced by mostly by Bob Lotta's office in combination with Debbie Dingell's office, who, while that's what makes it bipartisan, obviously Miss Dingell is from Michigan and has always, like her deceased husband, has had very strong support for the industry. And so that bill contains a preemption clause and language, and amongst a lot of other problematic clauses in the legislation. But the preemption one is in dispute. The industry is saying in public that they don't want to mess with state traffic laws. They don't want to mess with anything the states are doing. They just don't want the states, essentially regulating the performance of those vehicles or having access to the safety cases that are being developed under the bill. Every person I've spoken with that doesn't work for the auto industry says the opposite, that the preemption language in the bill could eviscerate consumer rights across the country, could prevent people from taking their claims to court if they are in a crash in one of these vehicles. And it's something that, I think deserves the gaslight of the week, because it's such a kind of cynical approach. And it seems like, the lawyers for the industry know that the language is vague, know that once bills like this is passed, that they're going to be able to challenge a lot of things going on in states. I'm thinking, even at Santa Monica, where they're trying to enforce a noise ordinance around Waymo right now. Things like that states have always done, that the federal government has never had its hand in, have to be protected. So our message to, the legislators and to industry is, if you want to preempt a state from taking certain actions, be very specific about it, because otherwise, if it's vague, I don't believe any of the consumer groups out there are going to even remotely support such language, because the risk there is far too high. The juice isn't worth the squeeze.
I mean, I'm not surprised that the guy from Mississippi is all for states' rights. I get it. But Michael, you do win gaslight of the week. I mean, it's the juice isn't worth the squeeze. And that, and more importantly, is you said, I think this deserves gaslight of the week. And that's how you win. Fred, you aren't that far behind, because you said, oh no, the Chinese, and you did some hand gesture. Like you were being attacked by aliens. I'm not really sure, but only our high-end viewers can afford to see that image. But yeah, bravo, Michael. Well done. You win gaslight of the week. But one of you could have won if you did this next story from Ford. This is from Ars Technica, titled "Ford is getting ready to put AI assistance in its cars." I'm looking forward to the recalls. This is going to be amazing. I'm going to quote from this. This is from Doug Field, Ford's chief EV design and digital officer. He also has the world's largest business card. Our vision for the customer is simple, but not elementary. A seamless layer of intelligence that travels with you between your phone and your vehicle. Not generic intelligence. Many people can do that better than we can. many people can build cars better than you can. What customers need is intelligence that understands where you are, what you're doing, and what your vehicle is capable of, and then makes the next decision simpler. As an example, Fields, sorry, I had to stop doing my weird Keanu Reeves voice.
Thank you.
That's how I imagine this guy talks. As an example, Fields suggests you take a photo of something you want to load into your truck, upload it to the AI, and then find out whether it will fit in the bed.
Wow.
This is a senior executive at Ford saying, if you bought one of our trucks, you're probably an idiot.
That is funny. You know, there is a side of this kind of in-car AI that I think can work in some ways. Watch.
Okay.
So there's a lot of buttons, and we talked about the issue with buttons being moved to the touch screen and the problems consumers could be having with that. Well, the problems they are having, their complaints are pretty high on that. But I think there's room in there for an AI solution. I don't have a lot, you know. I hope everyone who listens to the podcast knows I'm fairly cynical when it comes to the things that AI hype that's around us. But in this case, you know, if instead of pushing a button or instead of scrolling through a menu to get to it, if you could say windshield wipers high, you know, things like that, where you're still looking at the road, you're still, you know, holding your steering wheel, and presumably it's not going to take that much of a cognitive break to turn to think through the process of saying windshield wipers high. I think that these systems could preserve some of the driver attention versus distracting it if they're implemented right. I mean, imagine being able to control every feature, you know, climate control, your stereo, all of that in your vehicle without hitting buttons and having to take your eyes off the road and your hands off the wheel. Maybe there's room for AI in that regard, although I do not want it in cars to, you know, be conversing with people, just giving them another way to be distracted while they're driving.
See, I think what you just said exists on some cars already, and Fred's going to add to this.
Well, a lot of that does, but I think the whole idea that every single decision that you are making relative to where you are, when you are, and how you are being mediated by a computer with the data being sent who knows where is very dangerous and as Orwellian as I can imagine. Any aspect of life. This to me seems like a terrible, terrible idea, unless and until all of the associated data privacy issues have been ironed out to the public satisfaction. And I don't think that's going to happen in any of our lifetimes. There's too much money to be made by people stealing information about who you are, where you are, when you are, and how you are, to ever put that in the hands of the people who can be damaged by it. This is just a rolling nightmare.
I will say on that front, you know, there was a bill introduced, or the proposal was presented for the hearing yesterday that sought to address this issue. I don't know that it was perfect, but it, you know, certainly tried to give consumers the right to access their personal data and vehicles, and put pretty decent restrictions on manufacturers' ability to sell that information on. Particularly information that's personally identifiable. I think that addresses some of the issues like the GM owners whose information was leaked and sold to LexisNexis and made its way to insurance companies, and then who then raised some of their rates. That's certainly a concern. So that there is legislation that's possible and could move to protect consumers in some of those areas. However, given the massive amount of capital that AI companies have access to, and their fairly substantial lobbying footprint in DC, I don't know that it would be feasible to be able to, block AI companies from receiving data generated by a person talking to their car. I guess we will see. There's a lot of legislation I believe should be written on AI. The odds of it passing at this point in history, however, are not looking good, particularly since the government was just trying to make AI preempt states from doing anything on AI just a month ago, and that barely got kicked out. So it's a big new world.
It's not just the sale of data. It's somebody with a Hispanic accent saying they're going to go to Home Depot, right? All of a sudden you got ice on your tail. It's a woman in Texas saying she's going to needs directions to an obstetrician. All of a sudden you got all those maniacs on your tail trying to enforce their own view of what the world ought to be like. I think that even making it available to third parties without consent of the person who is originating that data is an absolutely terrible idea.
Yeah.
And it's is a success for the PR of the AI companies to get people to think that getting access to the data is perfectly fine. We'll keep the data, and if you call us up, then we'll get rid of it.
Well, Fred, when they signed up for our AI system, they agreed to our terms of service that said we could do whatever we wanted with it.
They sure did. It's right there on page 37.
So I kind of like you're talking about these features, these voice recognition features, and technically there's no reason that it has to go to the cloud to do, like, turn the windshield wipers on, turn the rear defroster on. That could all just be kept locally. But what I want to know, and my question for our astute and technical listeners is what's harder to get correct, a rear view camera or AI voice recognition controlling your windshield wipers? I want to know. I know at least some of you have some insight into this, because they can't get rear view cameras, because that's apparently a lot harder than we thought. So I'm highly skeptical that Doug Field at Ford will be working there next year. Oh, wait, sorry. That's unfairly cynical. That's Michael's fairly cynical. I'm unfairly cynical. But let's go on to, we've talked a lot about the touchscreens in cars. This is my transition to buttons. From sciencealert.com, car manufacturers asked to bring back old-fashioned controls. Each time you press a button, it goes, "Aruga." Quoting from the article, in fact, ANCAP Safety, the Independent Car Safety Assessment Program for Australia and New Zealand, has announced that from 2026 will ask car manufacturers to bring back buttons for important driver controls, including headlights and windscreen wipers. Similar moves are underway in Europe. NCAP Safety will explicitly assess how vehicle design support safe driving, and not just how well occupants are protected in the event of a crash, which means calling time on touchscreens that control everything in your car. I love this idea. Oh no, Fred has disappeared from the podcast. Hopefully he'll
be back soon.
His internet, I'm sure, has died. At the same time, I have a cat trying to attack my audio system.
So this is, I think the Euro NCAP kind of started this a few months back. Australia is following along. It's somewhere I think that the United States should also go towards, just because we need to evaluate these systems. We need to evaluate touchscreen systems, make sure they're not distracting people, and make sure that the whole process of using vehicle features with a touchscreen isn't much less safe than having buttons. And I'm glad that Australia is moving that way. I'm glad Europe did it. And I'm hoping that NHTSA will get its NCAP house in order in the near future. And there's another thing we talked about at the hearing yesterday, improving NCAP. There were some provisions that, took steps that could improve NCAP. There were some really bad provisions in that bill, one of which would allow manufacturers to do their own testing and voluntarily submit their own tests that would go toward their 5-star rating.
Wait, so they want to skip that whole, because right now we even talked the 5-star crash test is just kind of pro forma, like everyone passes it.
Everyone passes. That's the number one thing that NCAP needs to fix. I mean, everyone passing it, I think, is basically manufacturers over time are going to be able to design vehicles that meet these tests and that get 4 or 5 stars virtually every time if you're not updating the tests and the standards and requiring more out of manufacturers every few years. That's what NHTSA hasn't done. It hasn't kept up with the updates for crash testing. And even when you go to crash prevention right now, you're getting ratings based on whether a manufacturer has certain crash prevention tech in the car and not how well it works. And if you're not discriminating between manufacturers there, they don't have an incentive to make things better so that they can have 5 stars to advertise with. And it's really important that NHTSA stays on top of NCAP, continually upgrades the standards, because that's how you push safety innovation in the industry. Have we returned? Has Fred returned?
Fred has not returned, but that's okay because we know what he was going to talk about, and I don't remember what number he left off on. So hopefully he'll return. And I'm going to do a story from about Hyundai right now, where Hyundai is it's launching its own robo-taxi service because that's what we need. According from this article from InsideEVs.com, this is Motional CEO Laura Major, who I believe that Hyundai has teamed up with Motional to provide this service.
Yeah, I think basically Hyundai's got the cars, Motional's got the tech, and they're joining up to do similar to what Waymo does, where you've taken a car that's compliant with the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards, and then you can outfit it with autonomous capabilities and avoid the issue that a fleet like Zoox is having, where they're having to apply for an exemption. They should be having to apply for an exemption. And it makes it a little easier to deploy a lot of vehicles because they're all Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standard compliant, and there's nothing else you really need to do because there are no regulations around autonomous vehicles at the federal level right now.
So I'm going to quote from this article. This is again from CEO Laura Major. I think Hyundai is committed to robotics and autonomy and AI. They see it having a profound impact on the world. And autonomy is coming to the world first through robo-taxis. This is a very Elon type thing. I don't understand how autonomous cars and robots, are related. They're like related the same way, I guess, donuts and bread is related. They have some related ingredients, but they're solving very different problems. Well, actually solving the same problems. How can I get more juicy carbohydrates in my body?
That quote just sounds like every other vehicle and AI manufacturer on Earth, right?
It does.
We're committed to it. We think it's going to have a profound impact on the world. That's just typical pablum.
Yeah, nonsense. Before we go to recalls, let's talk Amazon. That's right. It's been a minute since we've talked about the world of Amazon, and we're not talking about Zoox. We're talking. I don't know if you knew this, but you could buy a used car off of Amazon. This is mind-blowing to me, but the problem is that Amazon is selling these cars that have open recalls. And they're just saying, hey, well, consumer, you figure it out. You do this on your own. I'm going to quote from this article. We have linked to MSN. Not considered a consumer product, a used car, however, lives in a loophole world. The Federal Trade Commission warns that federal law doesn't require dealers to fix recalls on used cars before they sell them. That doesn't make the defects less real. It just means that the burden shifts often onto the buyer, often too late in the process, and after the excitement has already done its work. So this could have been my gaslight as well, because I don't understand how a used car is not considered a consumer product. Oh, did I become a professional driver when I bought a car? Like, how is that a thing?
So right now under federal law, if you're selling a new car and a recall comes out, you have to stop the sale of that vehicle. You cannot sell it until it's repaired. But if you have used cars in your inventory that have recalls on them, there is no federal law that requires the repair of those vehicles. There is a federal law that requires the repair of rental cars, but just like there is no law that requires consumers to get their cars repaired, there is no law that requires used car dealers to repair them prior to sale. This is something that we have supported federal bills on, state bills on. There are actually, I believe, at least one state and a couple that have good arguments that this is something that's part of their law, but that it's being ignored. that are forcing dealers to do these repairs before they sell the vehicles. A lot of the major manufacturers have pledged to do so in their vehicles when they're reselling them. If GMC dealer has a Sierra pickup that's used on its lot that has a recall on it, they'll fix it before it goes to a customer, or they say they will. We don't have any way of tracking that. But in this case, Amazon is connecting, individuals that are selling cars, and maybe, I don't know if they're working with dealerships and all sorts of things as well. I'm sure they are.
Too.
Yeah. And when there are recalls in those vehicles, it appears that they're not including that in the description of the car, so that whoever's buying it is unaware that it's got a recall. I would suggest to everyone listening that anytime you are buying a vehicle, particularly if it's used, that you run its VIN. For a lot of things, you want to run it through at least Carfax and one of the databases that can pick up on whether it might or might not be a salvage title or former lemon. You never know what you're getting unless you do your homework. And it's really important it's particularly checking things like Carfax to, it's not always a perfect record, but you can get a good idea for what the previous owner did in terms of maintenance. And if you're buying a vehicle, for instance, where the warranty transfers, you're going to want to make sure that the previous owner did their maintenance, because if they didn't, your warranty might be voided if you have an issue like losing an engine or something like that. So there's a lot of things that online retailers need to do here. I will say this: the government, when it sells its vehicles at auction online, is also selling vehicles with recalls. So I think it's the General Services Administration, when they're selling vehicles in auction with recalls, they're not having them repaired first either, even though NHTSA is also an arm of the same government that would require them to do that. It's an odd situation, and frankly, I think consumers just get the sore end of the stick here. They're leaving dealer lots with safety issues intact.
I don't think we're living in a world yet where I'd feel comfortable saying, "Hey, I want to buy a used car off of Amazon or a used car on the internet." I don't know. A lot of people do. Carvana has been around a while, right? Yeah, but I thought they sold new cars. New cars, I'm fine with. They're pretty much the same. No, it's used cars. Michael Brooks is shaking.
Lyra, there's a lot of online used car sellers. A lot of people buy them, sight unseen, and I don't know if I recommend that, but if you do your homework, and you've got a low mileage vehicle, you've got pictures, and you've got the maintenance records. You can make a decision. If the vehicle doesn't turn out to be what you were expecting, hopefully you can return it.
Well, that's good to know. And with that, it looks like Mr. Fred Perkins is trying to rejoin our little conversation here.
And I'm back.
Hey, welcome. Perfect timing. Hey, you got a chance to do your what is that? The Tao of Fred. You're going to do 3 more of those things. We were really stalling and dragging things out.
I'm going to do 4 more so we can finish it up.
Okay.
All right. So again, this is the checklist to provide people with some technical insights into AV safety that kind of increases the depth of interaction with it without having to go through a graduate degree in engineering. So number 33.
And look, Anthony updated the website.
Yeah, it only took a few tries, so that's good. Number 33, has the applicant shown that the subject computer-driven vehicles safety critical and life critical logical functionality operation is inspectable by officials during required periodic and on-demand safety inspections? This is actually an interesting one because I just had my oil changed and they did a free safety inspection on my car. And it's about, 50 items on here that they checked. None of the items have to do with the self-driving features of my computer-driven vehicle. Those features become evident when I switch on the lane keeping assist, for example, and the adaptive cruise control. But nothing on here addresses that. And in fact, those are all safety critical functions. Because if your adaptive cruise control fails, for example, and neglects to identify the car in front of you, you're in a world of hurt. So there's a lot of work that's got to get done to provide visibility into these hidden safety critical functions. Number 34, has the applicant shown that the safety critical and life critical electrical and electronic components are safely within their expected lifetime throughout the CDV's service life? Few people appreciate that a lot of the components that are in a modern data processing system have limited life. For example, the electronic memories, the flash memory has a limited life. There are other components too that only last for a while, relays and who knows what. So in order for these capabilities to function properly, you got to make sure that the components are within their expected and qualified lifetime. Number 35, has the applicant shown safe handling of cargo loading and unloading, including luggage and personal items? This is an item that's come up recently with the Waymo complaining that people aren't closing their doors and asking passersby to come and please close the door so they can go on to another paying customer.
That's just a jobs program. That's what that is. That's a government sponsored jobs program. That's a feature.
It's not government sponsored.
That's a Waymo sponsored jobs
and
program.
not only that, it also the tow trucks and the people who are doing it were definitely, in the article at least, complaining about the rates offered. So
yeah, there's all that, but there's also the idea that, as Jeff Farrar said, there's going to be a lot of handicapped people and elderly people using these vehicles, and it's kind of a lifesaver for them. But if you have self-closing doors on your vehicle to avoid having to hire people to come around and close the doors, how do you make sure that those are going to be executed safely? Or maybe executed is a bad verb to use in that context, but
but that's important because we've seen, particularly children caught both in windows and in seats that move. And if there's not a way to prevent that type of situation from occurring, where we used to see a lot of children standing on the rocker switches on power windows and being strangulated by the window going up, which we filed a petition on right after I got to the center, maybe about 20 years ago, and ultimately got a safety standard put in place that got rid of the rocker switches and also went towards reversing, the windows that can detect an obstruction and reverse themselves. And I think seats need to be able to do the same things in a lot of circumstances. But that's, the tailgate and doors that are electronically operated are going to run into the same problem if they don't have that kind of technology.
And especially now that we're seeing a lot of Waymo users put their kids in them and kiss them goodbye and send them off to school. Violation of the terms of service, of course, but it still happens. And Waymo is not seemingly trying to prevent it. Instead, they're trying to put in
Waymo Teen.
Yeah.
That's their program.
Waymo for teens.
Michael, I got to ask, does the American Disabilities Act, does that apply to the backseat of cars?
Not to my knowledge.
Oh, because I'm thinking
it's not a public. I don't know what. I'm not an expert there. But it's not really a public space. The coolest thing that I was thinking about over the last few days, or that the industry talked about, was that because the autonomous vehicle industry has now put so much emphasis on, helping people with disabilities. I think, like I said in the hearing, we'll see how that turns out long term when they start major deployments, if they start major deployments. But they're creating there's a system where wheelchairs can be effectively locked in place without assistance by a human, which I think is super cool. Because a lot of the crashes that are, injure or kill folks who are confined to wheelchairs are a lot of the injuries that occur and the deaths that occur are due to the fact that the wheelchairs aren't properly secured in the vehicle. And so I think it's a pretty awesome idea to have, electronic or automated wheelchair securement systems that can make sure these folks are tightly strapped into the vehicle. But it's kind of funny that that's an offshoot of a lot of the industry's, kind of push a lot of the autonomous industry's push using the disabilities groups has resulted in something like that. It's kind of a nice outcome.
It is a nice outcome, but they also have to accommodate the ability of people to get out of the car in an emergency.
Right.
Particularly when there's an electrical failure. If those switches and lock mechanisms are running off the 12-volt system, you better not put it into a Tesla.
Every car, I just figured it out, guys. Every car should come with a fire axe right in the headliner. So if you're stuck in there, you just pull that fire axe down, you break through that window.
That's a great idea. I like that.
Thank you. I am smart.
Finally, last item on my checklist, on our checklist, is has the applicant shown the capacity to demonstrate and report both initial and ongoing safety criteria, including accommodation of relevant community standards? Right. So
now you're just being mean. Come on.
Well, if you're a legislator and you're responsible for public safety, it probably is a good idea to make sure that somebody who is looking for permission to operate automatic hazardous industrial machinery on your roads with no human supervision is accountable to the safety standards and has some way to address the public's need to know how you've conformed to those safety standards. Just as a reminder, I've been using computer-driven vehicles rather than the SAE levels because they've all got the same problem. If it's level 2, 3, 4, 5, it doesn't matter. If you've ceded control of your vehicle while underway to a computer, they've all got the same problems. They've all got responsibility for human life. They've all got responsibility for management of safety critical and life critical functions. And they're all in the same boat. So we're all in the same boat. And thank you for giving us time to go through all these. And they're available on our website. Again, any suggestions? We've already picked up a few from people and put them in here. But any more suggestions you've got or oversights, so we'd be glad to hear about it.
Excellent. And if you're a legislator, use this, steal it from us. Just, even if you just clicked off one or two, that'd be great. But if you do, then go to autosafety.org and click on donate. Just something little in the tip jar. Now let's do some recalls. First up, Volvo, 40 vehicles. 40 vehicles. All right. The 2025 Volvo EX30. Potential overheating of the high voltage battery cell due to formation of lithium plating growth. So you can get some thermal problems. Thankfully, it's only 30 vehicles. And it's 40 vehicles. Look, that's already gone up since I said it. No,
it's this is the first recall of 2026. You don't seem as excited about it.
You're right. But January 2nd, 2026.
Yeah.
Volvo. I mean, I had four.
That's what I was saying. Nobody had their money on a Volvo park outside recall.
No.
That's because, Volvo isn't exactly known as being unsafe or having a lot of defect problems, and certainly not park outside. So that's the first recall of 2026. Park outside recall. If you have one of those vehicles, folks, don't put it in your garage until it can be fixed, which looks like it's going to be sometime around later February.
All right. Up next, Rivian. January 5th, this recall is 19,641 vehicles. The 2022 to 2025 R1S, the R1T, toe link joints reassembled during vehicle service with a service procedure before March 10th, 2025 may result in a joint that is not reassembled to design intent and could experience unintended forces. What is a toe link joint? Is Rivian just messing with me?
It's in your front suspension.
You don't want that. Look, that's personal. What's in my front suspension? Okay.
Yeah, well, that's fine. But you asked the question. So it's in the front suspension and it has to do with turning the wheels left and right.
Okay.
I read through this the first time and I'm still not sure exactly what the real safety risk is. Under the regulations that NHTSA administers around here, manufacturers have to include a description of the safety risk. And here it's basically separation of the toe link increases the risk of crash without prior warning. Well, what happens so that consumers can know what the actual threat is. If I was NHTSA, I would have sent this back and said, you guys need to do a little more homework and give us a better description of the safety risk, because I would argue that one this description isn't totally compliant with the regs. Anyway, that's going to be available for owners later in February as well.
I think that if you have a problem and this breaks, you can no longer control the direction your car is going in.
Right.
So this is way bad.
Way bad. Oh yeah. Next up, Volvo again. What? Wait, so Volvo ends 2025 with a recall and they start off 2026 with a recall?
Yeah, and this was a big one. This was 413,000 vehicles.
413,151. The 2025 EC40, 2022 to 2024 C40B EV, blah. Who comes up with these names? EX40, the EX75, a whole bunch of really dumb named cars. What is going on? I have to keep oh, come on. Boo. Show's over.
I stuck that one in there. You didn't
rear
get
view
my acronym,
camera.
RVCR.
Yeah, the rear view camera image does not show during the start of each backing event. Good thing Michael Brooks is saying, hey, man, we'll just have AI do it. Hey, car, is there anything behind me?
No, that's not what I was saying.
Oh, that's not. Oh.
No. I think maybe turning on systems and moving your volume up or down on your radio are the kind of things I would think about, but definitely not evaluating the environment for the human driver so that they can just put it in reverse.
All right. So this one is a park outside just so I can smash your rear view camera lens with a bat.
And this is, this looks like owners will have the ability to get a fix again, sometimes in mid to late February. And it's going to be a software update I'm assuming, to have something to do with it looks like rear automatic braking, cross traffic alert are still functional. That's good.
Wow.
Basically, the rear view camera won't show the image during the backing event, and hopefully the software will patch that up. I'm sure it will.
If you have this vehicle, realize that you can still turn your head and look behind you.
That's the 20th century, though.
I know. That's our show. Thanks for listening. We'll be back next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
For more information, visit www.autosafety.org.